Welcome to RPG Reanimators, a podcast for GMs where we dissect horror scenarios and offer our experiences and advice to reanimate them at the table. I'm Nathan.
I'm Alex.
I'm Holly.
Sophia.
So let's see who's in the waiting room. Today, we're joined by Sophia Tinney, the author of Kingdoms and the upcoming Fever Dream Nexus. Thanks for joining us, Sophia.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm super excited.
Well, today we're consulting on an acute case of kingdoms. We'll discuss lessons we've learned from our games and consult about the best advice for running kingdoms at your table. For those that haven't finished our playthrough on the YouTube channel, we'll most likely be hitting spoilers as we go, so you have been warned. Now, let's begin our consultation.
So, Sophia, we'd like to get to know you a little better. So, could you tell us how you got started with tabletop RPGs and what inspired you to become someone who produces tabletop RPG content?
Well, I actually got started after my dad was really into like 70s Redbox, like really old stuff. And well, he pulled me one day and said, "Hey, I'm gonna get back into D&D." And we went to a fourth edition game. I learned I didn't like fourth edition very much.
Nice.
Very crunchy.
And after that, with the rise of OSR content, I transitioned from being a GURPS DM to being an OSR DM. And I think that mix of 4E, GURPS, and OSR kind of created my weird worlds I like to build.
Yeah, there's such a huge difference between like OSR gameplay and what you traditionally have is like what, fifth edition D&D nowadays. Because like I think they call OSR like a thinking person's game where you want to like avoid combat as much as you can because you'll just get pasted. Do you find yourself getting inspiration from other tabletop RPG games you've played? And what are some of your favorites?
Some of my favorites, especially with how the OSR scene has come out, is actually stuff that doesn't like strive to be D&D. I'm a big fan of Electric Bastion Land and everything he's doing. Into the Odd is really good. I'm a big fan of like the 3-stat kind of system. Knave is really good. Just stuff like that. Very light OSR that focuses more on, like you said, thinking. Although I don't know if I'll call it exactly thinking man's game. I don't want to like put it above any other systems.
You're speaking Nathan's language, though. I think you just named several systems that Nathan owns and is excited about. So
I have Into the Odd somewhere on this bookshelf over here, and have you played Troika at all?
That's I got Troika right over here. Troika is awesome. It's a big inspiration for Fever Dream.
Excellent. I was thinking that seems similar. We'll talk more about Fever Dream near the end, I hope, because I'm very excited for that. But let's talk a little bit about Kingdoms. What is Kingdoms? How would you define it?
Kingdoms is a biblical, low-tech, dark fantasy tabletop kingdom realm RPG. I think that's what they call it. Yeah, a little mix of PvP, little mix of Monster Hunter, stuff like that.
Definitely saw the Monster Hunter inspiration.
Yeah,
love it.
Yeah. What were some of the inspirations for Kingdoms?
So just to jump off the mediant, I started Kingdoms from a biblical perspective and kind of worked backwards because I spent a good portion of my life in like a private Christian academy. I got real sick of it. So Gnosticism is a big part of Kingdoms. A lot of the symbolism is there. From there, you can start to get like the basic, dark, grimdark, catalog, Berserk, Dark Souls. Gameplay wise, Monster Hunter is gigantic for it. Crusader Kings. But really where the idea was birthed was watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and watching how each season, like they have a new heir, a new protagonist that's like the son of the last one. And I just really love that. I want that more in tabletop games.
Have you ever tried the board game Kingdom Death? Because this also makes me think a little bit of it, where it's this like high lethality, like fighting these crazy monsters.
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen Kingdom Death, and I'd be lying to say if it wasn't gorgeous, and I think I stole some things from it, to be blunt. Like the monster brain system is really cool. I'm not a gigantic fan of its like art style, some of the elements it has to it, but Kingdom Death is definitely on there.
Awesome.
Yeah, I can see the berserk too of just the bleakness of the wasteland, the
Oh
armies.
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
this is this panel right here is just a reference to Griffith holding the thing.
Awesome. So that's really interesting, the biblical aspect of it, because now that you say that, I can see that in some of the. I mean, it's literally there with the Judases and whatnot. How do you think that informed the later design?
So do you mean design as in like the mechanics, or you mean like end game?
Yeah, kind of both, really. But yeah, I mean, in-game spoiler alert for Holly and Alex is the behemoth showing up and just wreaking havoc over all of the sand castles that everybody has built is a very cool finale to it. It's very OSR like Mork Borg and that feel of revelations. It ends, and then you burn the book, right? Like,
Yeah, you burn the Morkborg book when your campaign's over.
That's so interesting.
But did you find that like that kind of biblical feel comes through? Like what do you think informed like the monster aspect of it there?
Oh, definitely. Some of the beasts are heavily inspired by passages in the Bible. Plenty of them kind of developed around the same time the world did. See, the Screamer is a good example of kind of developing alongside the world while also taking passages from the Bible. I believe I based it off of something about a winged threat in the sky, and then I was kind of developing these irradiated mountains at the time, and I was like,
Yeah.
"It's a really big owl." Just a radiated owl.
Yeah.
There's definitely more content there for the Bible when you get to like the Judases, like you said, like humanity versus humanity.
Yeah, that's really cool how you're using the Bible and directly reading passages from it just for like content. That's such a great way to incorporate everything.
Yeah, I think it's underrated. I think there's some good content in there to steal from. Not a big fan of a lot of it, but
Yeah, the Bible's got some gnarly stuff.
The uses of the deities, I know you watched a little bit of our playthrough, but we had Max's characters, which were obviously very religion based, and I thought that was a neat element to highlight as a writer for this, because I think a lot of games would just go, this is your kingdom, we're going to worry about how you train your people, and not consider as much religion and the power that you can get from that. There's not really a question there. I think it's cool.
thank you. I love that system. I think as you get later into the game, it kind of dwindles down to like one or two religions on the continent, and then players just end up adopting each other's, and it becomes like a really good RP element as you guys kind of build that.
That's cool. Yeah. I noticed mechanically you have that kind of feeling of the Pope excommunicating people, and that you can make other players lose favor. And that's a really interesting mechanic. Like you said, late game. Do you find people start out with, maybe like if you had four players, are there four religions at the start, or do people pretty quickly adopt each other?
Well, I kind of think about each person's kingdom kind of specializing generally. Obviously, there will be competition and overlap, but I kind of planned it so that, oh, these people are trying to build towards tech, so they have lots of academies. These people are building towards religion, so they have shrines. So I kind of picture zero religion at the start, especially for like a dead tech start, complete caveman. And as you kind of stack and stack and stack, one person ends up really just getting ahead of religion, or like one or two people. So they end up being the religious pope, like you said. So I actually picture really just specialized players.
Okay.
Kind of like cleric, thief, but entire kingdoms.
Oh, I
I
like
think
that.
that's definitely where Max's character was like
Mhm.
heading. Well, maybe not Pope, but he was definitely like the leader of some kind of cult there, moving in that direction.
That's what religions are. They're just cults.
Yeah, you know.
I was getting a huge civilization vibe when I was like trying to decide what I wanted to do with the hexes under my control.
hmm
And like I could imagine like people going for like a religious victory or like a culture victory in that game. So
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because we all kind of went a different direction, right? Like Colin was very like a warmonger,
Mhm.
and Max went like the religious cult way, and I went like culture and the arts. And I don't know how to describe what you guys were doing, Alex. It was something crazy over
capitalism.
there. Capitalism,
We're selling
the
bodies.
true enemy of us all.
That's right.
But yeah, Civ 5 definitely inspired it. I have like 1,000 hours in that game
Great
just to
game.
respond to that.
Let's talk a little bit about the island of kingdoms and the different biomes that have split this up. So, for those that are unaware, the kingdoms locations are not like it's kind of one big island with a couple smaller ones off to the side, but none of them are, I would say, massive, right? Like this is a fairly small-ish continent. What inspired the size of it?
I remember I planned it pretty carefully in terms of expanding hexes, how many you could get like kind of before endgame, before you start rubbing against each other, before you start worrying about, like, oh, settling here is going to deal with the unit. I have to fight that now.
Mhm.
So that's pretty carefully sized. I think one of my biggest regrets with the book specifically is I don't think I put the actual hex map straight into the book. Yeah, it's just the normal map. I include it with the files, but that's something that's always irked me. Yeah, it's pretty carefully planned to be around how many you can get before you get issues.
Mm.
Interesting, interesting. So, lengthwise, about how many sessions do you run into for a full, let's say, tech level 0 to Behemoth shows up? How many sessions we talking?
So I would say for me in playtesting, I try to get like 2 sessions per character,
Mhm.
played character, not necessarily a baby or child. And then I would do, let's see, like 3 to 4 sessions a month, like try to do it every week. I would say we got to like end game within like 6 months, I'd say
Okay.
about. And I think you could expand that, especially if you do it like every other week or you focus on a character for longer, like do
Mhm.
more hunts per character.
Mhm.
I believe you guys did like a couple hunts per character. I try to like
Yeah.
just do one per roller
Mm.
personally, and just trying to
Okay.
accelerate.
Before we get into the system of it all, I do want to ask what inspired the art style for this, the reds and black and white. There's not a ton of color except in some of the later tables to really differentiate things.
So actually, at the time when I started this, it was for ZineQuest, and back then, I don't know if they have it now. I haven't seen it in a while. Pretty in my own world with Fever Dream, but back then there was limitations to what could count for
Hmm.
ZineQuest. So
Okay.
you could only have 2 colors, I believe, or like, yeah, 2 colors, but white didn't count. So I was like,
Interesting.
white, black for the darkness, and then red for blood. And that's where the colors came from. And from then I just kind of went for a scratchy, like caveman scrolling on the wall for the
Hmm.
beasts, trying to be like, okay,
Yeah.
this is what I think it looks like trying to tell other cavemen, not necessarily accurate depiction of
Ah,
it.
That's cool.
That is really interesting. I'd never thought about it like that, but that's such an interesting like thought process to be like, yeah, how would a caveman depict this creature? The three colors really do make it all very striking though, especially the red just kind of like popping out at you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of expression full, less like biological.
hmm
yeah. Yeah, I like that. It reminded me a bit of the Scrap Princesses work for Veins of the Earth. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
they are amazing.
Yeah, yeah. That it's very evocative of what the creature would feel like. It's more like a painting than a photograph, which I really vibe with for these. we talked a little bit about system. I'd like to talk about some of the mechanics because some of these things I was very curious about while I was running the game. Primarily, the first one is when the game starts, do you build out additional kingdoms that are not the players?
I personally started out at the like if there's a page for it, the dead start, just pure tech level 1.
Yep.
You start off with like 20 people around you, all low bloods. That's the start I personally love and playtested the most. I believe I there is a start for starting in a village, a little bit higher tech level, very similar to what you guys did, except you kind of did it like individually and you all met somewhere. For me, I generally don't think that the competing leaders can go very far, even if you start with them. I kind of see them always ending up at most like high blood, not god blood, just NPCs. They can't really achieve that level of independence and survivability against the dark. I could see with having low players definitely having NPCs, but generally I just kind of like to have, especially if you have like 3 to 6 players, just player kingdoms of some courts.
I see. So then when you do these the kind of like the low level starts, do you start then everyone in the same area and then they branch out from there?
Yeah, I like to start everyone in the silent shrublands and grasslands.
Yeah.
Mountains are good. I've put them in the mountains before. That start is amazing because everyone just starts out with we invented fire, and then the Smiler just comes out of the dark and just an immediate boss battle. It's a nasty start. I love it.
Oh, that's great.
That's awesome.
That's an awesome set piece. That's very Dark Souls. That's so Dark Souls.
Yeah, having that 20 makes sense, having those backup people to just kind of bring into the session from there. It's a bit of a funnel, to use the
Yeah,
OSR term, I think.
exactly.
In terms of the system, there's a few numbers beyond the stats, right? We've got your 3 core stats, but each player also will be keeping track of their power, their light, and their favor, assuming they worship anything at all. How did you start mathing out what that looks like for these games that will run maybe like 20 plus sessions?
To be honest with you, that was probably the hardest part of the system. I mean, combat is easy to develop, ideas for monsters is easy, but that was de facto the hardest. There was lots of sessions where we would go, okay, let's simulate a campaign like that for playtesting, and that was hell. For me, generally, I settled upon power kind of being this tool that you get. It's very hard to generate. Like, I think there's commerce districts, but that's really it. Otherwise, you have to go and hunt beasts. So just kind of playing into the core of the game. And then you get light by being, God King by killing the other God King. So just kind of playing into the different aspects of like PvP, monster hunting. Expansion really just serves to, in my opinion, set the theater for RP. I don't really think it's like super in depth like something like Crusader Kings or Civ. I don't really try for it to be, especially in the OSR world. I know there's some really great systems out there like Stars Without Number that like focus on factions and focus on like, oh, the stats for this one is this. But I think you did it perfectly. Like when you played it, you just did, okay, well, Marceline wants to go kill this artist before they escaped. Roll will represent the general willpower of your kingdom killing this guy.
Yep.
Like that's it. I think it's very light and very pushing of the rest of the gameplay.
Yeah, that's I'm glad to hear that. And definitely the OSR being, there's so much you can put on one die roll where it can just be like, does your character just die randomly? And that last session we did, we spoiler, a character just rolled once and was like, well, table says I die, so that's it for me. It's like, yeah.
Childbirth. Yeah.
Yep.
Brutal.
Yeah. It's dangerous. So here's a Personal question from me. How is power split after the battle? Does everybody get 10 power?
Yeah, I remember that when I was watching. Everyone gets 10, and I believe the person that kills them gets 5 bonus, essentially.
So what do you normally have people spend power on? You don't like build out your kingdom in a sudden rush, right? It is a kind of gradual sort of feel. So I think we ended up with people having a lot of power. What do you usually do to uh, bleed off some of that?
I actually don't really mind having a lot of power because part of the God King inheritance is whoever has the highest. So if you sit on it and you
Mm.
don't spend like a ton,
Oh,
and you
okay.
keep killing monsters, if you just have like 60 and everyone else has 30, you're going to inherit God King repeatedly.
Gotcha.
And that's
Ah.
kind of by design. And at that point, the only way to get it from that person is to personally kill them. So that's kind of by design is you kind of vault power, especially as the game goes on. But there is some other ways. I believe there's a small text at the bottom that doesn't go into it too much, but
Right.
I would ask for power like, oh, you want to build a spy network or you want to have someone assassinated. Oh, you want to clear out like a path to make a road through mountains. You want to
Mhm.
chop down these woods, kick these unit out. That's like 1 to 3 power. Just, give me a couple. That's how I would run it as a DM.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Very
Makes
cool.
sense.
Yeah, I wish I'd pushed the God King a little bit more the later sessions. I know Colin did some really fun stuff with it. So I want to talk a little bit about that. It goes well to the next point is the light power. The God King has that power of the light dice where they can use these d6 to augment their body. Super interesting to limit that to just what a human body has. What drove that, and how do you like to run that at the table? How do you kind of highlight the importance of that?
I think it's part of like the world building is it's kind of external versus internal, like human spirit
Mhm.
versus the world around you. So that kind of is where that came from, just augmenting, light,
Mhm.
high blood, divinity versus the dark shadow, other, basically. And when it comes to running that, I actually don't balance it a lot. Like that's why there's very light suggestions. But
Mhm.
when it comes to combat, you're basically just expending everything you can because unlike a traditional OSR or any system, you're not like slowly dungeon delving and slowly adventuring and
Right.
losing resources. You're more just a sprint into a beast and sprinting all your everything you have out at him. So for me, I kind of let you do whatever you really want with that, with limitation of like what you can push your body to do. I mean, I've had people like literally fly like XX feet or whatever, like literally break physics with their characters. And I don't really mind because how I run it and how I intended
Mhm.
to write it is kind of to be as harsh as possible. Like
Ah.
the boss battles are generally just written to be really, really, really mean. So if players get this advantage with light dice, that's awesome for them.
Speaking on the system a little more, what is your personal preference when dealing with like secret knowledge and information? Do you like to keep it open table or closed table, where you passing notes to players or just having it all out?
So I've run most of my games, my adulthood over Discord. I mean, post-pandemic world. So I generally love the idea of some PvP with spy elements, like espionage, intrigue, DMing people, shooting messages back and
Mm.
forth. But I try to do very similar to what you did, like as much open table as possible because I don't want people to be bored. If I can run a scene and have it be public, I will do that every time.
Hmm.
Only time I ever have really close table is if people are doing things like PvP, planting traps in their kingdoms, ruining trade, learning information. And I had a lot of that in my play testing just because I think my players are super mean to each other.
Like, I want to destroy this dam that's above this enemy kingdom's village. I'm just gonna slide the GM a note.
Ooh, unlucky.
I've had entire districts just knocked out by other players. Yeah, especially as
Wow.
you get to
That's
late
cool.
game.
how do you balance this PvP? Do you care about balance and like fairness and giving the other player a chance to kind of counteract that? Like the dam example, right? If I'm sliding you a note saying I want to just fuck up this person's village by destroying the dam, do you allow the person, the victim, I guess, a chance to maybe counteract that?
So it kind of depends on what stage you are at.
Sure.
If I can get a bit technical about how I balanced it.
No, we're all about technicality here.
Yeah.
I planned for early game to kind of be, fighting beasts, fighting creatures, all that stuff, the dark, settling. And as you got later and later into the game, it became much more PvP and much more, I want this land, I want this, I built this, we're having wars, I want this, I want to be God King. And beasts become a lot less scary. I mean, like I've had players not domesticate, but put a beast in a zoo, put a smiler in a zoo and game. It's ridiculous stuff. So for me, when it comes to PvP, especially as you get into the later game and people have all these heirs and all these kids, especially with each other. I mean, I believe you guys had some like cross bloodline stuff too. You end up always having someone to inherit. It's no longer like a big problem of, oh, if I die, I have no characters left. So I generally allow it, especially if the table's cool with it. You always have to like ask everyone when you get into a game, hey, what are we cool with? What's okay? This is kind of a PvP system. Doesn't work with every group, definitely.
Right. I can't let me just like storm Holly's capital and then kill all the heirs.
Oh yeah, that's like a bit extreme. But I've had a character completely wiped out before.
Wow.
Like one time, like in the mid game. But he was really mean. I mean, he was planting like spy networks and destroying entire trades of other people. Like imagine if he destroyed like your trade, I believe it was like stone, it was like death stone or something.
Yeah.
Like imagine if that was just wiped out.
Wow.
Like, yeah, so they murdered him.
Just give characters reasons to hate each other and then
exactly.
just watch the House of Cards fall.
But I actually gave him a very special thing. I let him come back as a Judas to mess up that player's life.
That was actually one of my questions was, what do you do if a player's leader dies and they have no heirs? Like early game, I guess, where do you go from there? They kind of, I guess, what would your plan be at that point?
I think that depends on if your kingdoms are kind of like separate or merged. I think there's different groups. Like you guys were very separate.
Yeah.
But in my games, I've kind of had kingdoms more closely like tight knit. Like some of them like really in the same courts as each other. I mean, like bowing down to one ruler.
Oh, gotcha.
In that scenario, like I've had players take the heirs of other characters.
Gotcha.
Even if completely unrelated as a backup.
Yeah, I really like the different starting levels that you put in the book, because it did give us the opportunity to ask those questions initially of, do you want to start out as a single village? Do you want to do this? And our group was big on playing supervillains, basically. I guess my question there is, how unhinged at the start do you usually find your players going?
I think you guys were about on point for like an accelerated start.
Yes.
Nice.
Like when you go really low tech level, like we just invented fire. People generally are more, we have to work together or we're going to die.
Right.
But when you have like a hex, when you have a court established, people get nasty, like I said, as you get later and later and later. And you guys did the whole, we're God blood. We don't have to listen to you. I'm going to slap my low blood perfectly.
Oh, Colin.
The horrible megalomaniacs. That's it's good. Like power gets to you. And I think this system really reflects that.
I mean, it is like literal, like a lot of dilemmas are, oh, why is this guy acting like an asshole? But you guys are literally God blood, and like you're gonna inherit, you're just better than them.
The setting to make the Godbloods like literally tower over everyone is such a striking visual that I think helps players get in that mindset of like, yeah, I'm gonna slap the low blood around. I'm gonna throw 100 of them into the volcano because I am straight up taller, better. Like I've got this cool crown of horns. Like I barely relate to them at all, which is a fun. I mean, this is an entire look at what power does to people is a system, and I really like that about it. Do you ever get people that actually end up being altruistic?
The closest that I've gotten is, I mean, people generally care about their people from
Mhm.
like a rulership POV, like, oh, I want my people to be happier than the other people over there on the other side of the lawn. But altruistic's pretty harsh. I would say I definitely have gotten some people to be that, especially as you get later and you're able to get more, oh, here, have wine,
Mhm.
here, have
Yep.
fabric.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big part of it is as you get more heirs and get more characters down, you get not necessarily bored, but you want to try new things. You might play as a character that actually cares, is raised amongst the low blood, or is, comes out of like third place heir and becomes number one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really neat idea with the genealogical of how many different player types you get to play with that. Like Alex, you, even though your characters were being overwritten, you got to play two very different characters
That's right.
in one, what, 4 sessions? Like normally you don't get to play that many different. And I like that it makes you deal with the trauma of your parents that they left you, because everybody's parents, at least in ours, were psychopaths. So you could see that at the next level down of the damage that it did to them and then how it affects how they rule. It's a really neat difference to the kingdom's campaigns.
Daddy issues, the game.
Generational trauma.
Exactly.
So you've mentioned the Yuna a few times, and I've debated how to ask this, but how do you decide how much you define when you're writing these books versus how much you leave kind of open to just suggestion? Because the Yuna are a small section at the bottom and they're mentioned a few times, but I could see they're pretty important. They're very present.
Yeah, so the units specifically are interesting because in terms of like base writing, they're the only things that are civilized, from the get-go, no matter what start you do. They're like the only competing like civilization. And they're like humans who have merged with the dark in this weird, like giving up the light way. So I think that's definitely their interesting aspect. In terms of running this book and taking like what do you make important mechanically on the pages, I find with OSR specifically it's not like, as important to make each piece vital. You can kind of say there's this thing here, and if it develops in your world that's cool. If it doesn't develop in your world, if you just, who cares? Like I said earlier, I don't think I should give NPCs entire like rules for factions or give them entire resources. I think generally you can just play around the players and have what they find interesting. That's really just like an OSR rulings versus rules type aspect.
Yeah, I like that. It's a little bit of follow what they are interested in. Like the screaming fish, for example. Colin really latched onto those in a fun way. It'd be interesting to see like some of the other things. Like I think we had beetles at the start, but there was less focus on that, so they've kind of drifted away. It's interesting.
So, Sophia, could you tell us like what's your game improv to prep ratio? Like when you're preparing for a session of Kingdoms? Like 80% improv, 20% prep?
So with Kingdom specifically, I actually think it's surprisingly lower prep than
Yeah.
what you would picture. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, but especially as it gets going and going and going, you start getting player wants to do this, so you react. Player wants to interact with other player, so they interact. The hardest part really for me is running Judases. They're a pain in the ass. And running beasts. Beasts generally don't require that much prep. I think just putting an interesting environment, an interesting creature, and the players in a room just creates a session especially when you don't have a lot of NPCs or NPC kingdoms, NPC like opinions running around.
Mhm.
There is some tables for running like, oh, there's a random witch in your kingdom who's done blank blank and causing issues. Like, kind of instigation, especially if your players aren't doing PvP. But I generally found I didn't need to do much prep. Players thought about what they wanted to do all week. They'd show up and just say, I'm going to do this and that.
Yeah, there's a lot of freedom for the players. A lot.
So I guess, yeah, I'm going to turn that to you, Alex and Holly, is how did you kind of plan what you wanted to do?
I have an idea of like what I kind of want to pull the story at the moment too, and then I try to make moves that contribute to that. Like it sounds super simple because it is.
Yeah, for me, it was really like I wanted to tell this interesting story. I very much enjoyed the experience. I am not very a PvP person, so I was probably not the best choice to play this game, but I really loved playing it. So in my mind, like everything that I wanted to do was so internal to my own kingdom, and like the machinations of my two heirs, like fighting, butting heads against each other, which comes to a head in our final episode. And one of them prevails over the other. But this idea in my head of like the machinations of my heirs trying to take over control of my kingdom and where this was going, and then so it was all the story elements of like what was this interesting story I'm trying to build up, this like almost Greek tragedy that's happening in my kingdom. So and to that I was just I built a religious district just so that I could have oracles warning my leader, like someone is coming for you, someone close to you, and then having her interpret that as like the kingdom next door is coming for me. And
I'd like to add on to that. I think Holly said it best. Like you're kind of focusing on your own kingdom. Like I wanted to see like show how bad things were getting, so I started a civil war with myself.
Mhm.
And like you're just reacting to opportunities that are presented to you. I see a neighboring kingdom has a is showing some weakness, therefore I'm going to start taking people from the
Yeah, I think you and Alex started a little bit of that there at the not you and Alex, you and
max.
Max
Yeah,
started that a little bit at the end for
yeah. I
sure.
mean, if it happens, it happens.
I think a big one too is the downtimes, like kind of push things in weird directions. You get crazy events that kind of go, oh,
Yeah.
now I have to focus on this, or now I'm dealing with this. So I actually just don't think there's a really ton of prep personally, unless you're dealing with NPCs, Judases, stuff like that.
So you're 90% improv, 10% prep.
Just about, yeah. That
Yeah.
applies to most of my games.
You know what monster you want to throw at him. Like, all right, that sounds good.
Exactly.
You've talked a little bit about the Judases, and I just want to highlight those because it's a neat 2-page spread with a few options for that. Is how do you introduce these pretty powerful NPCs into a game naturally, I guess would be the term. How do you bring them up without making everyone go, "Hey, look over there. That's trouble."
I think it definitely depends on the Judas, and especially how you're handling NPCs and errors and stuff. So, like, you would play errors until like the character took them over, I think, most of the time as DM. But the problem is, like you said, having someone just show up that's low blood or high blood even, and out of nowhere makes all your alarms trigger. That's why Judas I generally tend towards later game, mid game when there's
Okay.
actually NPCs and advisors. I like to name my advisors and give them a bit more character the longer they get to live, give them kids, possibly, if that's where like the bigger prep comes in. I think it depends definitely on each Judas. I mean, like some of them just make religions underneath yours, like heretics, and just form cults. Some of them literally form rival kingdoms, like Adam, like he just pops up and just creates that. Many of them, like I think like 4 of them, just hide it in your court as, oh, it's a body double or it's a succubus. Just these things that advisors could be. You kind of just like subtly swap them out for a replacement Judas. So I think that's the key is the court, really. The people that are close to the God King, as you start building that up, that's where you implement like the bad apples.
That makes total sense. And we were still at a fairly low tech level of that. So that might explain why we didn't get to the point of needing them as much as, yeah, I don't think any of us had full on courts at this point. You were all pretty, I suppose Holly, your character would probably be the closest to having actual advisors that she might listen to.
Yeah, I think someone had an advisor maybe, but yeah, that it was
Yeah.
mostly just peons.
All right. So let's talk a little bit. We've talked about the system, how to make a game really shine through this, and there's going to be some questions in here that are me looking back at what we did and kind of wondering like, how could I have done that better? But one thing I really appreciate is the player pamphlets. There are the pamphlets that describe what the stats are, what a life step is. I don't think there's like a name generator on it, but it's pretty much everything other than that that you need to make a character and keep the kingdom going. What inspired you to break that out into its own thing?
One thing that's always annoyed me with RPGs is the issue of, do I give them the book? Do I give them the PDF? Because if you've ever had the PDF, like, you could just go like to a page and see spoilers. So that was kind of the incentive there, but also the idea of there's these systems that aren't inherent to RPGs, such as heirs, such as getting power, putting down settlements. And I think players really needed that as like an easy, like, how do I do this? How do I do that? Like, if you've ever played Catan or board games like that, you get a little square that says, oh, I need this to build this. And you just hand it out to all the players. I think that's where that is. Also, yeah, there's no name generator on there, but there is in the book.
Yes. Yes. That is very nice. I wish I'd thrown that at players, just taken a little screenshot of that.
Oh, not Craig.
Not Craig. God, sometimes name generators online just let you down. So, monster design, I think you've already answered one of the questions of dealing with the escalation power of, because I was kind of looking ahead from where we were. We hit at a point where monsters were, I think, fairly manageable with armor and whatnot. And I was wondering as tech levels went on, but it sounds like you really transition the game from that point. Is that accurate? Like transition away from monsters?
I would say the importance, the focus, the lens really moves over time, but there is worse monsters. There's two per area, and I don't really like differentiate them, but there is ones that are nastier. There's ones that are harder to deal with. A good example would be let's see what you guys dealt with.
See, we dealt with the Fury. The Glutton was the latest one that we did.
That was nasty.
I believe the Glutton is in the Shrublands. Yeah, so the Crawler was like much easier than the Glutton. I believe they're in the same area. I think it's actually a decent example. Like I said, it's not really differentiated in the book, but there are ones that are harder to deal with than others. And they just have nastier damage, nastier stats. I also have variations in there for each one. So you can give them kind of like, oh, this one, every time you hit it, you get hit with acid, or it's bigger, or it's faster. And then the final option I would do when I had a lot of players or was really late in the game is I would have multiple monsters.
Okay.
And that is hard to deal with.
Do you usually run with the classic 5x5 grid or theater of the mind?
I usually would run with a grid or at least a whiteboard. I wouldn't get really too lost in the sauce, not like a 5e game, but I think it does matter. There's some weapons in there that matter for like, oh, use this, move 2 spaces forward or 10 feet forward. And beasts are very tacked onto a grid. They have lots of things where it's like he moves 20 feet forward and attacks. So I think it's definitely important to have something, even if it's just a whiteboard, something to keep track of that. And when I run monsters, half the fight for me is making interesting environments. So like in the woods, dealing with the trees, dealing with these gigantic blockades, having him run between them, having him run in the trees with some beasts, having the canyon like fighting vertically, dealing with that. So for me, I think it's really, really interesting to have half the fight be the environment around you.
Yeah. How do you involve the dark that is the environment? Because light plays a obviously capital L light plays a very big role in the game. I think it's what as soon as you're 20 feet away from light, you're basically a goner. How do you bring that into fights?
Just to tack on PvPs first, I've had people sailing on boats down rivers extinguish all of their light sources on the boat in a PvP fight, and it just killed everything on that boat. Players, low bloods.
Oh my God.
So fires target lights in PvP. That's one thing I found that I love. When it comes to beasts specifically, I think part of the action economy is having a light source on you, and whether that's a low blood behind you with a light source, even though they usually don't like to enter combat, they have to like roll for that and like morale. Having a low blood carry it, having it in one of your hands, you know, like can I have a shield or do I need to have a light? Having the monster hit you and it goes out, having it like you use it and it goes out. There's to me, half the fight is dealing with the light, or it's a third of the fight's the light, a third of the fight's the beast moves, and the last is the environment.
Very cool. Yeah, I wish I'd done more with that. That's a really good way to keep the fight interesting. And I like too that the beasts have an attack pattern that they follow. That made it a lot easier than me trying to come up with what are they gonna do at this second? It's just don't worry about it. Next thing on the list.
Mine isn't a question, more so if we're talking about like making Kingdom shine. Again, this is my personal perspective of really enjoying the world building is giving players that opportunity to develop the world and the NPCs that like inhabit it and how they interact with those people and that world, especially when we have like recurring NPCs that, you know, you build up court advisors or you build up heirs and things like that, and how you interact with that and how those people interact with the other player characters as well, like giving space for that world building. And Nathan, I think you did a great job of like balancing combat with these interludes where we talk about like, what are you doing right now? What's happening in your kingdom right now? I thought that was really great. I really enjoyed that. And I think that's just one way to kind of make that this idea of like generations and the world that you inhabit becomes more advanced as time goes on. Like giving that opportunity to just build out that world and thematically is interesting.
Yeah, I want to go back to those dynamic environments that Sophia was talking about to really make Kingdom shine. Now, when you say dynamic or exciting environment, like what do you imagine? Because I imagine like environmental destruction, like trees topple over when these giant creatures smash into them, rocks fall, fire spreads. Like I find that to be very exciting. Do you have any other examples besides like verticality or like on a moving river boat?
Yeah, so I think the fire spreads one is a really good one. Inside the wild grass, there's always like a I don't remember if you guys got to that location. There's always things happening, like something new has happened. It's been wiped clean. There's always like a wildfire, or the grass is as hard as diamonds. It's as tall as 20 feet, you know, crazy stuff. And you deal with a monster in that environment is a good example. Whatever's going on there. The woods falling is a great one, especially as you get closer to the core of it. You get to the bramble and you get to weird, like Lovecraftian things happening in the center while also dealing with the beast. The mountains, verticality, and again, is important, but there's also caves there where you can deal with a creature with radiation happening inside the cave, but also outside you fall. So for me, that's really, really a picture. I try to make each biome kind of give a good stage.
So whatever you do, don't make a 5x5 room with nothing in it.
I mean, it's fine as long as there's pillars, benches, even like just having a torch makes it interesting.
Yep. So like no, try not to do empty rooms. Got it. I think that's just basic dungeon design.
I agree. I think it's a DM thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like too that you have a lot of tables for inspiration for like every spot you can roll something and come up with. I think we ended up with like mineral gorillas that they just found. It's great inspiration to go like, well, okay, what does the environment then look like? Well, these mineral gorillas probably have something they're surviving on, some cave system that they like. It's good inspiration for kind of what you're talking about, Alex, of if you'd fought something in the mountains and I rolled the gorillas, you're probably going to deal with them while you're in the fight.
They're probably freaking out. Oh, like you fell into a cave, it's full of mineral gorillas.
In retrospect, I should have had the ham cows stampede you during your
Oh,
fight with
that
the
would have been
crawler.
great.
Do it. Do it. Do it.
So there is a section in here, and Holly, you had mentioned like, oh, I asked a lot of questions. Well, there's the Dark Master suggestions, and I was really just following those of, you're controlling the beasts, but then try and make players' internal lives as interesting as possible. Then go a layer higher and kind of look at what's going on with their court, maybe other settlements that they're in charge of. You weren't really big enough to do that, but I could see long term, like the university being something maybe it tries to break away,
Mhm.
and then just causing chaos throughout. Is there any advice that you'd add a few years on now?
Honestly, if I could choose to magically edit it, I would make it just a bit bigger. I
Mhm.
think for Fever Dream, like I've with that DM section, it's definitely not just one page. I think it
Yeah.
definitely helps just have a bit more clarification and examples. I think that's one of the weaknesses actually is the book doesn't have a lot of examples, like an example fight, an example,
Mm.
issue, example settlement breaking free, like you said, the Art Institute. But otherwise, I think it gives a pretty good advice in how I view it. Like the whole zoom in, if you have player's life, family, court, nation, and then just the continent.
Yeah. Does the continent have an official name that I just missed?
It does not, no.
Okay.
Nothing
Excellent.
really has like fancy names like, oh, this is the shrublands, this is the frozen. Yeah. I kind of let players name everything. In my
Cool.
first playthrough of the game, I literally let players make language from scratch, and they loved it. But I mean, that was something.
What advice do you have for kind of getting players in the same space to interact with each other once probably more once they're those bigger kingdoms because it sounds like you often start with people closer together, which would have been smart, I think, because when we ran it we had four separate kingdoms pretty far apart. It became a little bit of a struggle to be like, well, do you guys send someone across the shrublands where they probably get eaten to talk to each other? Like, what do you guys do? But how do you drive that player interaction?
Especially if starting small in like one location or one biome, players are incentivized to go out and explore. That's a big thing. Is like you said, the hunts. A lot of it becomes expeditions. It becomes more like, okay, let's go see what's over here. Like I may not even
Yeah.
show them the map with a lot of my DMing, and they
Ah,
go, let's follow the coastline. Let's go into inland. Let's follow the river and just kind of exploring. I got that from, if you ever heard of like a West Marches game where people
mhm.
are just
Yeah.
traveling to explore. That's part of it. I do like the hunt aspect though, for sure. Just going, we need to go hunt something. There's a lot of
Yeah.
cultural, we need to prove ourselves as you guys discovered as you played. So
Yeah.
characters go, I need to just prove myself. And then lastly, I think as you get into later game, I had and are more spread out, I would have settlements deal with beasts like, oh, the glutton just popped out of the ground and attacked one of my settlements. And now I have to go deal with that. That was definitely an aspect is more becoming in their territory and they attack you and they deal with you.
Yeah, that's all great. I especially like the just like making the scope smaller at the start. You just zoom in on the map. The players can't see that far. So yeah, that's a great idea. So my question for you is there any cut content in Kingdoms that you wanted to add that didn't make it for the final release?
Cut content. I mean, for me, I wanted to make the ocean a bigger deal. I kind of did that with some tables afterwards, as you guys saw the exploration table. There was a lot of traits that didn't make it. They ended up either in the cards, or I think there's another couple pages or at least of more traits. I really was working on if you recall at the Kickstarter, there was a bonus design, like kind of a not sequel, but further content, endgame content, like almost modern day science fantasy type deal with a whole nother continent, dealing with a whole nother empire, dealing with all that. But when the game came out, there was like life was always just a mess, and there wasn't like a big hubbub about the game. So I kind of moved on to things in my 20s and stuff, and now I'm kind of like back into RPG design.
Nice.
So, what is your favorite part of Kingdoms?
Probably the realm aspect of it. I'm not necessarily even talking mechanics, but more like the god blood type system, the one god blood, high bloods, courts, having players rule nations. I really like the realm RPG aspect of it. I think that's my favorite. You could literally probably cut out the beast and still run a good game if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But for me, that's my favorite part, is that with like heirs, having to deal with kids, having to deal with inheritance. I love that. I think it's very underrated in RPGs.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. As the GM, a lot of what I was doing was just asking questions about what I thought was interesting with players when they say stuff about like, oh, we're building this kingdom. I'm like, okay, well, what the hell are you building? Like, what does it look like? Oh, you're ordering all this corpse stone. How the hell are you using these dead bodies and stone? Like, what nightmare are you coming up with?
Yeah, like the life step is probably like the backbone. I love the life step system.
I do too. I love the life step.
Just the like getting heirlooms, making monuments, it really drove home that feeling like you're not just one person, you are setting up something long term. And yeah, I could see returning to like Holly, your kingdom had that monument with Marceline, I think, where she was like very scientific. It would have been interesting to come back to that later and see what your kingdom has done with that monument. If they've revered it or if they just kind of go, I don't know who that was. It doesn't matter. So yeah, I can see the realm stuff is very neat. I want to say for those that watched the YouTube, there are a few things I wish I'd done more of. Traumas. I should be a meaner GM, is what I'm hearing. I really should have raked people over the coals with these monsters. So next time, y'all are going to lose some characters a little bit more often. But just a lot of the random tables are really neat. The front of the book has the various kingdoms and like personality generators. I wish I'd done more with that because I honestly forgot it was there. And then looking through it today was like, there's so much variety I could have just randomly added to people. We've talked about some of the like the stories and sort of things that we've run across. Is what are your favorite kingdoms experiences when you've run it?
My favorite beast experience is probably dealing with the fingers. Like players are in a canyon fighting the fingers as he crawls up the wall, and they're dealing with caves that intermingle between the canyon up to like the desert above. And they're dealing with this guy who, if he touches you, you're just infected, just like that. They're fighting him. They're dealing with light. They're dealing with verticality. They're dealing with the salt flats above, like the winds. That was probably my favorite encounter, and probably still one of my favorite monsters in the book. It's not really any specific story with that. I just like that. My favorite PvP story, I would say, I had a player become. I said this earlier. I had a player become a Judas as everything he had died, and he wanted to get revenge. And he was the double. He's basically like a mimic type situation. We had the God King, unrelated, sentence a player to death. At that point, he was strong enough where he could just do that. Sends another kingdom, another
Cool.
ruler to death. And they all rolled out of the same court. So, I mean, he arrested him and he was on the chopping block.
Oh my God.
But he had 2 heads because of a trait. So they have had 2 axes. And dealing with that 2-head situation delayed it long enough so that some characters could come and stop the execution. And it's just this big fight in the court between all of the kingdoms, like civil war type situation. Meanwhile, one of the counselors is the double, it's the mimic, and he reveals himself and just ends up getting absolutely slammed by all the players at once as they turn their attention to the dark. The darkness is way worse than anything another king can do to them. And that was just, it was just this perfect intermingling of, okay, here's like evil NPC or evil dark things, and then players fighting over God King, and then this weird trait, and then all the hierarchy of Empire versus King versus God King, whatever. That was just, it was just a mess. People were losing their shit at the time.
That makes so much sense. The mess is the fun part. It sounds like for a lot of this is just creating these horrible like situations to be in. All right. Well, I want to give a little bit of time because Fever Dream Nexus is coming up. No pressure, but how would you describe Fever Dream Nexus?
Fever Dream Nexus is a trippy samurai weird Eastern RPG where you play in a dream world as a sleepwalker who uses tracks, which are literal real life musics. You use your shadow and you use extremely weird cultures to interact with a weird world that doesn't exactly stay static as you move around.
The updates that have been sent out with the different like cultures and whatnot have been very exciting. How do you think the work on kingdoms informed the Fever Dream Nexus? Because it's a pretty different vibe, it seems like.
It actually informed it a lot in a lot of ways. First off, in terms of setting, they actually have a lot of interesting overlap. Kingdoms is a world permanently in the dark. Fever Dream is permanently in the light. There's no darkness. And as a result, it's kind of flipped. With Kingdoms, you deal with horror from the outside. You deal with external world shadows. And Fever Dream, you have your internal horror, your internal trauma. You're coming out and affecting the world, your shadow. So they're kind of flip setting wise. It's kind of smiling horror. Like the world is so overtly shiny and happy and it's full of life. Your character is like kind of a spring in that. But in terms of mechanics, the 2 big things are the life step system really taught me to make like a core engine, core engine that functions to move time and move characters forward and have events happen from that. And that's kind of how I'm working with the day system and the Fever Dream system is as you move throughout the world in Fever Dream Nexus, as you move through the Nexus, you have events pop up, shadows come out, time moves forward, you run out of supplies. Just a core like story engine to it was inspired by that. And finally, I would say the Fever Dream Nexus for its encounter tables is exactly the same as this. If you like this, you're gonna like that. It has the exact same thing for each different region, and there's dozens. So it's just in a lot of ways, it's a bigger expansion off of a lot of the core things Kingdoms taught me and Kingdoms runs on.
Awesome. So you mentioned tracks, which I think is a really interesting thing I haven't seen done in a lot of RPGs. So that's where you're tying a song to a character, right? What are some examples that you run through?
So I personally, when a character uses their track, I literally play the song on Spotify. So it becomes this amazing example of you'll have a very serious scene, very serious characters arguing over very serious traumas and situations and people being hurt and issues. and then a guy will use a track, and then X gonna give it to you. We'll just start playing, and it will just. It's the contrast really that I love.
Mm-hmm. It feels very JoJo to me in a very fun
Exactly.
way.
It's literally
Awesome. So check that out. That's update wise, that's coming out soon. I'm excited. Whenever it comes out, I'm very excited for that because I really like that sort of ultraviolet grassland. You mentioned Electric Bastion land, that Troika, that sort of very strange world. But boy, it looks like the lore for this is going to be fun to run, to just read into the various cultures you've got. And I think you've got some from the backers and whatnot too, right? Of people
yeah.
inspiring things.
Yeah, and I have some of the Kingdom's writers actually. Holly Estelle, who wrote the Judases, and William, who helped a lot with like the core systems. Both of them are writing cultures and working on my book. So.
Awesome.
Nice. Can Fever Dream Nexus be run as like almost like a one shot, or is this more like long-term play just like Kingdoms is?
So it's actually much more like one shot potential.
Mm-hmm.
With the whole day system, it's kind of made to be able to do an adventure one day. Like characters do go to a town, they deal with a situation, they move on to a new town, deal with a new situation. There is definitely long-term support in terms of the whole collect the parts of the prince ascend to godhood, become ruler of the Nexus.
Right.
So that's like the core push of players, but otherwise, it's actually decently episodic, I'd say, way more than Kingdoms by design. Yeah. And a lot of the growth is horizontal, it's not vertical. Like new equipment, new tracks, new things happening, as opposed to getting higher stats, better rolls. So yeah, I'd say it's actually more not literally one shots all the day, every day, but it's much more episodic than something like Kingdoms. It's built for like a long-term board game.
Yeah, we'd be interested in that.
Yes. Very much so. And it's nice that you're able to use all the colors again at this point.
I know, I'm happy, yeah.
I mean, what's the difference in art style? Like it's so much more vibrant, but how do you think that informs what you're running into?
It's completely different. Yeah, Kingdoms is these etchings that are very loosely scrawled on the wall. Fever Dream, I mean, it is super, super hyper detailed, super intrinsic, psychedelic color vomit. I mean, I've also gotten to like adding shading to some. Some of them are in Picasso, some of them are overtly stylized. I try to make each culture look just drawn by a different person if I can.
Yes, some of the you can see this all on the Kickstarter updates and whatnot. Some of the new factions that you've somewhat recently put out, like the Primeval, where it's that strange smiling shadowy shape that's all cut apart, just really really interesting looking. Be fun to play.
So for like Dream Nexus, Fever Dream Nexus, and like Kingdoms, do you imagine there would be some kind of support for like almost adventure modules or additional content?
So for Kingdoms, it's harder because it's like, it's a core like
It's super
1, 2, 3
personalized.
tech. Yeah, I definitely see like making new biomes. That's what I really wanted to do before I moved on to Fear Nexus, was make like a new continent, new areas, new beasts. I think that'd be really interesting. With Fever Dream, it's way easier. I mean, like you just slot in a new plate, a new town, a new culture, just like that. Almost everything on Fever Dream works based off of like, oh, here's the page, here's the spread. It doesn't have a lot of connection to it has like lore connection, but you can just run it on its own. So I totally see like a more corgi like slot in SD cards for that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So what's something today that has you really excited in the TTRPG space?
I would say the direction OSR is going with the lighter stuff, like the new, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Yeah, Mythic Bastionland is super cool. I like the direction of stuff like Knave, like I said earlier. I like the really like harkening back to like Maze Rats type stuff. I love that kind of lighter, more horizontal weirdness factor. Ultraviolet Grasslands is super fun. I just like seeing that kind of stuff of OSR. That's just my jam.
Nice.
I can see some of the Maze Rats influences in terms of the flexibility in. So for those, I don't know, Holly and Alex, if you've done anything with Maze Rats, but the magic system is very just like roll up the table and you tell me what it does.
Wow.
And I can see some of that influences in, yeah, in like Kingdoms and whatnot, where especially the traits where there's some pretty wild things. The explosion trait in particular had a big effect in our latest episode. Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent. So is there anything else you would like to discuss about Fever Dream Nexus or Kingdoms before we close it out?
Not particularly. I've really been enjoying your guys' game. I haven't got to the latest episode, but I'm really excited to watch it. Check out Fever Dream Nexus on Kickstarter. You can still pre-order it. And Kingdoms, I have 1 billion copies, so check out my Gumroad.
Yes, and we'll be putting links out to all of these down in the bio, I believe is what they call it on YouTube, but I don't know podcast-wise what they call it.
Show notes.
Yeah, absolutely support these games. I hope you keep making more and more of these because they are very exciting. I love the random and the bold ideas. We hope our deranged utterings are helpful in bringing this topic to life at your table. You can join the discussion on Discord and subscribe or follow the podcast to hear more gruesome consultations. Be sure to check out the show notes for links from the discussion, where to find us, and links to handouts and other resources. In particular, we'll be linking a Kingdoms character sheet for players that we used for our game. And Sophia, what's the best way to keep up to date on your projects?
I have a Twitter where you can check me out at Sophia Tinney. And then I have my Gumroad where I release all of my new products. So feel free to check that out at The Pirate.
Yes, and for those that want to pick up Kingdoms, the print and PDF is a steal. Absolutely a steal. Please go support that. This is one of my favorite books that I've been wanting to run for ages, so this has been very exciting. So until next time, thanks for listening to RPG Reanimators,
where your games can die
or live
on the table.
You're a potted plant. Go. What do you do?
Exactly.